Hello everyone, I'm VanguardOfValor, and this is the Binding of Isaac Rebirth's Trial by Player. Let's get into this game, and then we'll talk a little bit about what it's all about. So, starting a new run here, let's go. What is the Binding of Isaac Rebirth? Well, the Binding of Isaac Rebirth is something that'll be incredibly familiar to many of you, I'm sure, as in many ways it's very similar to the original Binding of Isaac by Edmund McMillen. This recreation of sorts of the game was done by Edmund McMillen in cooperation with Nicalis, the developers who brought us games like Cave Story, Night Sky, and who made the... ooh, look at that. Only I could get in there. And who made the 3DS adaptation of VVV, amongst other things. They have quite a list of pretty interesting things under their belt. And they are now responsible for bringing this to the table for us. Now, this game is, like I mentioned, in many ways very similar to the original Binding of Isaac, as you can probably tell from looking at it. Okay, ooh, that's bad damage right off the start. But it has its own elements as well, and we'll get into what specifically makes this version of it special momentarily. Now, if you're looking at Binding of Isaac and have somehow never played it before, I'll give you a quick rundown on what we're doing here. Effectively, what our objective is in this game is to run around a variety of floors, through randomly generated rooms, and fighting randomly selected enemies to earn randomly generated loot, acquire randomly chosen upgrades to help us be more powerful, and make it to the end. We do so by firing projectiles at our foes, namely our own tears, although sometimes that changes based on the upgrades that we pick up, and attempting to not die a horrible death. If we are successful in that venture, there's all kinds of rewards in store for us as we venture further in, but that's basically how it goes. You'll notice in this, one of the first things we did was go into an item room, which allowed us to acquire these two flies which are orbiting us to absorb damage, and things like that are some of the items that can be obtained to make your journey easier. There are all kinds of items that can be found along the way, some of which are offensive tools, some of which are defensive tools, some of which are activatable items. There are trinkets and usable consumables all over the place. The magic scab we just acquired gives us additional health and means that we get, I believe, more damage. It says as you pick up most things what they do, although not all of them. Now, there are different features that become available in this game that allow you to track things more easily, but let's jump down to the next floor and talk a little bit more about what we're getting into here. Just like in the original Binding of Isaac, there are a couple different resources that you need to be keeping track of as you make your way through your adventure. In addition to tracking your health, which is marked by those hearts in the top left, we're able to also keep track quite easily of our total money acquired, total bombs, total keys, whether or not we have a trinket, and whether or not we have a consumable. Now, in this game, unlike in the first game, you're only allowed to have a maximum of 12 heart containers of any type. In the first game, you could have any number of containers and they would go off the screen, which is a pretty interesting thing, but in this version of the game, that's no longer possible. So if you're carrying a whole ton of red hearts, then you won't be able to pick up any blue heart containers. Or, for example, if you have a ton of soul hearts and you find revenge hearts on the ground, you won't be able to pick them up. Now, like in the previous game, there are still red hearts, which are effectively your regenerating health. If you take damage to it, it leaves an empty canister behind, and you're able to recover that by picking up red hearts on the ground. There are still soul hearts, which are these blue hearts we've been picking up, which take armor, basically, before we get there. I have no idea what this is. Butt bombs. Toxic blast and 5 bombs. Okay. I have no idea what that does. Let's test one. Ah, fills the room with gas. Lovely. Alright, that seems like an interesting and potentially useful tool. And there are also the white hearts from the previous game, which I believe were generally referred to as eternal hearts. And they are effectively a heart canister in waiting. If you can keep that heart canister intact all the way to the end of the floor, and make it down to the next floor without damaging it, it becomes a full heart canister. That's pretty interesting. Plus, in this game, they did an interesting change with them, which allows them to basically stack with red hearts. So, unlike in the previous game, where your Eternal Hearts were always the most vulnerable heart in your inventory, and it was effectively insane to pick them up before you had beaten the level, because there was such a high chance of losing them, now they appear behind your Armor Hearts, so it's a lot more reasonable to keep them intact. Ooh, Guppy's tail already for free? Okay. This is going to change our luck as we move forwards here, but I'm sure it'll be beneficial to us as well. There's also, however, a new kind of heart added into this version of the game, and that is... Secret room? No secret room. Okay. There's a bunch of places the secret room could be, and we're going to try and find them. But that is the Revenge Heart, the Black Heart. And the interesting thing about that is that it acts in a manner very similar to that of the... I think we're just going to move on here. Very similar to that of the Soul Hearts, in that they provide armor layers for you. However, unlike the Soul Hearts, when the Revenge Hearts are destroyed, they actually damage everything on the screen, which is a pretty interesting thing. It can make nasty rooms a lot less dangerous because the damage dealt can be pretty significant, especially if the enemies... Oh, this is bad. The enemies who are being attacked have multiple segments to them. So, for example, if a Revenge Heart goes off while fighting Larry Jr., a snake-type boss composed of many parts, it'll often kill him instantly because it does so much damage to all of the different elements. Ooh, that's bad. We want to try and avoid taking damage as much as possible because, as in the previous game, avoiding taking damage on floors increases the odds of you finding a deal with the devil. And finding one of those means that you can trade your hearts with the devil in exchange for additional power-ups. In case you couldn't tell, this game has very dark themes, just like in the first one. Whoop, come on now. I find these gurglings particularly difficult to avoid injuring yourself against, partially because they fill the entire level with this red creep which hurts you to step on it, and also because as you shoot them they change trajectory, so if you're expecting them to go a certain way you often get yourself hurt while fighting them. And we've acquired the Torn Photo, which increases our tear speed and our shot speed, I believe. We're also sad now. And as I mentioned, we've opened up a Devil Door. We can come in here and see what he has to offer. Nothing that requires hearts, interestingly enough. So this could be beneficial to us, although it's unlikely to have any large, long-term benefits with regards to power-ups. That one just had spiders in it. Fair enough. What does this one have in it? Pills. Alright, we can experiment with these. These are our first consumables of the run. Consumables appear in the bottom right corner, and while we don't know what these pills do, once we discover their purposes, we'll keep that knowledge. That one's Lemon Party. We put a giant pool of acidic pee that damages any enemies that walk in it. And that one was Speed Down, so we're slower again. So I guess that makes up for the Speed Up we just got. It was Tears and Speed Up, right. And there's some more spiders. So we still keep our Tear Speed up, but we lose the other speed, which isn't that bad. Having lower speed isn't always a problem, because it makes you easier to control. Alright, back out of the Devil Room, and let's go down to the next floor. Now, just like in the previous game, every 2 floors, the style of the area changes. There we go, there's our Eternal Heart giving us an extra container. And you're able to encounter some new enemies, some new bosses, and things get generally a little bit more difficult every time you go down a series of 2 floors. Now, there's a lot of changes in this game, based on the original Isaac. For example, in addition to the hearts that were added, there are also new enemies that have been added. All manner of new enemies that have been added, and bosses, like the Gurglings we fought. Those were not in the original game, but are based in a very similar vein. There are also many new items, like the magic scab we acquired. Things like that were not in the original game either, nor the Torn Photo, as far as I can tell. Many of the game items that were in the original game actually begin this game unlocked, which is pretty interesting. Things like the Pinking Shears, which were not considered a great weapon, but were in the original game, are immediately unlocked once you start this one, which is pretty cool. So you immediately have a much more versatile selection of items to choose from. Not that you get to pick exactly which ones you're getting, mind you, but that's still the case. Things like this room as well. This room features 2 of the new environmental features. This stone is sucking me inwards at all times, and it has spikes that are only up for half the time, so you can actually walk over them while they're in the ground, and as long as you're not standing over them, they come back up, you're fine. This room has another one of those new features. Specifically, it has a 2x2 room. Not all rooms in Rebirth are locked into a simple small space. Also, for some reason I wouldn't start shooting there, I'm not sure why. But there's a lot more larger spaces in this version of the game. That was a terrible bit of damage there. I'm really bad at fighting this particular enemy because they just don't open their... And I didn't shoot for some reason again, that was weird. They just don't open their faces up, so it's hard to actually do damage. Plus these additional projectile launching enemies in the room make it even more difficult to fight these guys safely. So there's all kinds of things that can make this more challenging, which is a great addition to the game, because for some people, the original Binding of Isaac was getting a little bit samey and getting a little bit easy. Many people, who I'm sure could do similar things now, were clearing the game without too much difficulty on a pretty regular basis, and this definitely adds in a lot of new challenges for them to face, even if they were veterans of the old game, which is great. Also, I don't know what this is. I guess this is a door locked with bomb requirements? Let's try this. I've never seen this before. Oh, it requires more than one bomb. Let's try one more just to see what's inside. Interesting. What is this? I have never seen this type of room before. Weird. Alright. I've been playing this game for about 9 hours, according to Steam, but I've never seen this kind of room before, so I don't know what that's all about. Maybe we'll come back there later. Definitely strange. So there's all kinds of things hidden away in this room. Lots of things that I have yet to discover. Even having played it for quite a while. So that's good. It definitely keeps itself versatile. There's in fact a ton of new content, which I really feel does justify the fact that this has been released as a new game instead of as simply DLC like Wrath of the Lamb was. The new sound assets, the new visual assets, the new enemies, levels, bosses, and all that kind of thing really does make this worth its standing as a new additional game. There are a couple issues I have with it, but overall I think it's a very well done thing. Some people don't like the new art style, but in my opinion it is a coherent art style, which is good because it ties the whole thing together. It may not be exactly like what the old game was, but honestly, as it is a new production, I don't see why you would want it to be exactly the same as the old game. This is a new production, and it deserves to be treated as such. Now, whoop, I do have a couple issues with the art direction in a certain respect, and that's that it's a lot darker now, I feel, than it used to be. At least, not in all cases, but certainly in some. Let's go back and grab that item room before I forget. Oh, I'm taking so much silly damage here trying to talk while I go. I have no idea what this does yet. Rubber cement gives bouncing tears. Hey, that's cool! This is an item that I unlocked for beating the game with a certain character. Very cool. Alright. And let's keep going. But yes, one of the things I don't like, not particularly relevant in this exact instance, is that... Ooh, interesting how it doesn't always bounce straight off them. It bounces at right angles sometimes, bounces off the walls and hits them again. Is that some areas are incredibly dark, especially areas in the depths area of the game. They can be very difficult to see what you're actually looking at down there, which is not great in my opinion. It's not the end of the world, mind you, but it's definitely not great. Let's see if we can blow a hole in this wall and find a secret. Especially with the fact that your ooh, golden poops. Can I not break these? I can, okay. Especially with the fact that with the various upgrades you can get, your character can have a black effect over them, which makes them blend in heavily with the background, and the fact that many of the enemies in the game have a black skin effect, like the spiders and the flies, it can be really hard to see some of the enemies sometimes, and that's not great. We'll take this mysterious candy with us and go fight ourselves another boss. Here we're fighting the Headless Horseman. A staple of the old game were the horsemen, and they are back again as in this one, as with most of the other enemies who were in the first game. I'm not sure if there's anything that was in the first game that's been left out of this one. If there is, it hasn't come immediately to mind. But yeah, we are going to continue to experiment here as we fight our way through this boss fight and hopefully get to the next floor, but then we're probably going to be experimenting with some other things, because while this game... I'm doing poorly here, very poorly. While this game does introduce a lot of new features that were based on original features, it also adds a couple new things of its own which I think are really good. One of which we're going to show off momentarily, if I can kill this boss and see what new items we get. Come on now, you can do this, head. There we go, we got him. And that got us a pony, which is our usable item. I like the pony, but it definitely has its problems. It lets you fly, which is pretty beneficial, so we can go back through the area and fly around now. It also has a dash move, which allows us to attack enemies with it, so we can fly over spikes now without taking damage, which would have been great earlier in the floor before I kept injuring myself. But, is there anything back here that we can pick up? Not really. But, one of the great features that's now in this game that was not previously is the ability to do this. Stop a run in the middle and go back and continue it later. Not only that, but you may have noticed there are 3 files now as well, which means not only can you stop a run in the middle, but you have up to 3 games simultaneously. If you get bored of a certain game, or you come back later and you don't want to start that one again right away, or you have one where you're doing something like a YouTube video of it, and another one you want to play for your own purposes, you can have multiple files, and I think that's great. Definitely a really nice advancement from the first game. They also did a couple other kinds of additions, like these challenges. Originally in the game there were 10 challenges, now there are 20, many of which start the game locked and become unlocked as you accomplish various challenges in the game. And they give you the ability to do what I feel is one of the strongest elements of Binding of Isaac right off the bat. One of the best things about this game, and especially with Rebirth, is the ability to have really interesting combinations of abilities. So, for example, if we were to start with head trauma here, this challenge will overwrite the current mission that we're doing, so that's fine. That was just to show off the game, basically. But head trauma starts you off with a bunch of different items. As we can actually see when we hit here, we have soy milk, we have a tiny planet, we have the small rock, and we also have an iron bar, I believe. And what that does is it means we have these kinds of shots. Not exactly your normal Binding of Isaac type of attack, is it? Very fast, low damage, orbiting bullets that have a chance to stun your enemies. And that's really interesting, and that really changes how you have to play. It makes it look a lot different, it changes how you can actually attack things. And that's great! If we jump out of this and go into a different one, we start a different challenge. Let's start the Solar System challenge. In this particular challenge, you start out without the ability to fire tears. As you notice, we have a blindfold on there. We cannot shoot any attacks. What we have instead is a series of orbital flies. The blue fly and red fly both do damage, with the red fly doing more damage as they touch enemies, and you have 2 protective flies to help you absorb bullets coming your way. It's entirely different from how you normally play the game, and you also start out flying. Very different. If we come back and start the game again with a different challenge, we could start with the slow roll challenge here, which I have beaten already. In this one, instead of firing fast tears, you fire one enormous arrow, which returns to you. This thing is incredibly powerful, but you can only fire one at a time for quite some time, as you can see there, so you have to be very careful with your placement. But if you can land those shots, they are absolutely devastating. And these things are really the strength of the game. These different item combinations. This is an item combination of only 3 things. But it makes a really interesting gameplay. Things like this, which can occur in any game, really, if you get lucky to find those items, are part of what makes this game so much fun. The challenge mode allows you to start with them if you just want to start with a specific set and try something a bit different, but the ability to make those combinations that are so cool is the real strength of this game. However, I feel that that's also one of the biggest disadvantages of this game, which is that while the strength of it is in the combinations, there is also a heavy possibility that you just don't get any interesting combinations. If we come in here, I don't know what this does. Gimpy, Sweet Suffering. I have no idea what this does. But the point is, you can find a lot of items, especially follower type items, small minions that follow you around and give you some kind of benefit over time, that don't really add into any interesting combinations. And if you get a lot of those, it can be very much less enjoyable than if you do. That was definitely a problem in the first game, and it was probably more so a problem in the first game, because in the first version of Binding of Isaac, many items did not have any good synergy at all, and if you used them together, it wound up breaking their functionality entirely, making them almost unusable. There are certain weapons and items in particular that did that, but this game definitely does a better job of making those different synergies possible. Still, though, it's very disappointing when you do get a run which just doesn't have anything interesting in it, because it can take a long time and you may wind up without the firepower you need anyway, just through the lack of getting interesting item combinations. Now, I will say that this game does it better than I believe the first one did, because more of those different items are available to choose from, and more of those combinations specifically work together in interesting ways, but I do still feel like it's a bit disappointing sometimes. And one other interesting issue that I ran into when I started trying to record this video for YouTube was that I noticed that the game seems to have its run speed built into the frame count of the game. if you try and do anything with it that locks it at lower frames, it doesn't function very well. Lowering it to 30 frames per second actually halves the game speed. If you decide to try lowering it even further, the game speed lowers even further. So this may be a problem for people who are planning on doing things with the game which involves lowering the frames. It seems to work just fine at 60 FPS, but if you're attempting to go to lower frame rate, you're going to run into some problems. So, those are some of the issues I had to mention with this thing, but there are a couple other things that we're going to look at as well, mostly of which are positive. And let's jump back out to the menu as we do so. Now, one of the big things about this game is that items start off hidden, and many of them start off locked. There are many pages of items now, a big enhancement over the previous version of the game. Look at all that stuff, so many things. And many of them start out the game locked. As you accomplish various tasks, you unlock many of these secrets, and then you get the ability to use them in future runs. So that does add a good amount of replayability to the game, as moving forwards not only unlocks new challenges and new items and new characters, but changes how future runs can go, because of the fact that these new items are in the rotation, and new levels as well become available. When you first start the game, you only have access to 6 stages, but as you travel through, you gain access to 8, and then potentially even 10 stages, just like in the previous game, which are increasingly difficult as you go. There's also a number of locked endings and all kinds of hidden secrets for you to find. Now, one of the other great additions to this game is hidden in the character screen. There's in fact 3 really nice additions on this character screen, in my opinion. One of them is the win streak counter for those who like to do things like live streaming and show off how well they've been doing over a longer period of time. There's also the ability to input a seed. You can input a specific custom seed which will determine how the random generation happens in your game. And if you happen to have a game which is doing really interesting things with its level generation, you can take that seed and give it to somebody else, and they can get more or less the same experience you did, which is pretty cool as well, in my opinion. It means that it's possible to do simultaneous runs with somebody else and have them have more or less the same experience. It's possible to share interesting runs, and all that kind of thing is really cool. It's something that existed in mods in The Binding of Isaac before, but wasn't actually available simply as part of the game, and I think that's a great thing they've added in. And the last really cool thing, in addition to the hard mode, which I haven't even experimented with yet, so I have no idea what that involves, there's also that little empty tab in the top left. That empty note tracks which characters you've beaten the game with and in which ways. So I've beaten 4 of the characters, having beaten the heart, playing through normally. I've also beaten several of the challenges, as you saw, but here it tracks them, so I don't have to wonder, did I beat the heart with Magdalene yet? I know it's on the post-it note, and I know it'll track other kinds of kills as well. If you're able to make it into, for example, Sheol and kill Satan, it tracks it there as well. So that is a really interesting addition to the game, which makes it really easy to track which characters you have and haven't beaten it with, and I think that's really good. Plus, there are also 3 new characters added into this game. Azazel is interesting, although I feel he's a little bit too easy in some respects. Lazarus is interesting because he starts with an additional life. Eden is interesting because, as far as I can tell, they start with random stats, and you only gain the ability to play as them by beating the heart. That's what those Eden tokens refer to, as far as I can tell. Azazel is interesting, though, and we'll jump into a quick game with him so that I can show you what I mean. Azazel is an incredibly strong character to start with. He starts with the ability to fly. He starts with Brimstone, very short-ranged but very high damaging ability. And his downsides are that he starts with no coins, no bombs, no keys, and no permanent heart containers. With only 3 revenge hearts to take you through the game, it can be a little bit tricky to not wind up horribly dead. We've just got the mulligan, so every time we take damage, we acquire blue flies to help us out. But the fact that he's so incredibly powerful often means that, oh, it's actually whenever you attack. Wow, I didn't realize it was that strong. Means that often it's really easy to keep those hearts intact. We just got 2 additional hearts right there from that Balls of Steel pill we got. Although they aren't revenge hearts, they will still keep us alive, so that's very beneficial to us. And that kind of thing, I feel, does make this character really strong. Like, really absurdly strong. It's fun to have a really powerful character sometimes. but I feel as though they're almost too powerful. It's very easy to get a very dominant run going without too much difficulty with Azazel, but I guess it's only fair that there is one character for those who just want to start off with something strong and give it a shot. So, that is basically a quick look here at the Binding of Isaac Rebirth for our trial by player. I'll go do one boss fight here as Azazel. We'll see how Monstro stands up against our devilish little friend. You see what I mean? We're just vaporizing him. If we can actually land our hits, he does not get to live for very long. Goodbye, Monstro. Nice try. And characters like this are fun to use for sure, but they're definitely incredibly powerful as well. So let's hop back out again. And in conclusion, basically, for the Binding of Isaac Rebirth, this game is pretty cool. It definitely does a good job of advancing on the old game. A Rebirth is a really great name for it because it really does take the old game and recreate it in a way that adds a lot more to it and does a lot more with it. If you didn't like the original Binding of Isaac, odds are you will probably still not like this one. If you did like the original Binding of Isaac, but felt that it was getting a little bit stale, or you're looking for a little bit more from it, then Binding of Isaac Rebirth will be right up your alley. It has a lot more of the same, and it does it very well. But if the problems you had with the original Binding of Isaac were mechanical or based around the way the game runs, those haven't changed in any major way. So, in that case, the game will not be for you. If you are interested in checking it out, it is available on Steam. There is a link in the description below for you to go check it out for yourself. This has been Vanguard of Valor, and this was the Binding of Isaac Rebirth's Trial by Player. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you thought about this video in the comments below, as I am still very new with this series, and I'm interested in hearing some feedback on what you thought it was, how you thought it was, rather. But, for now, this is it. So, bye-bye.